Hello, everybody. So, we're going to do a quick book talk on pages 53, 5 to 63. And at the end of this, you're all going to have a short quiz. So, let's pay attention. Let's go over the things that you read in 55 to 63. So, we start off on page 55 with Clotilde Armenta talking about Pedro and Pablo. Remember, Pedro and Pablo are sitting out in front of the milk store, and they have their two knives, and they're wrapped up in newspaper. And she says that they look like children. They look like children, and she says that this is a bad thing. Why is it a bad thing? I would almost think that them looking like children would be a good thing, because then maybe they wouldn't go through with this murder. But she says it's a bad thing because only children are capable of everything, right? Children don't really think first. So she is a little bit concerned. So that's a concerning thing. And we have Rogelio de la Flor, and he's listening. This is her husband. He's listening to her talking about what's going on. He's like, listen, those two guys are not going to kill anybody, especially somebody so rich, right? We have nothing to worry about. She still doesn't really quite believe it. So she looks up and she sees Officer Leandro Pornoy. He's over there. So we have the police, and the police are over there, and they're talking, and he's come to pick up the mayor's milk. She doesn't hear what they're talking about, but she does see him looking at the knives. So when the officer leaves, he goes to the colonel, and he talks to the colonel. He tells him what the boys said. The boys told him, we're going to kill Santiago. So the officer tells the colonel, the mayor, hey, this is what's going to happen. He's like, oh my gosh, last night all he had to do was settle all sorts of arguments between people because everybody was drunk at the wedding, right? He's like, I just want a break. So he's not really in a rush. Then as he's on his way out and he's kind of walking around, his wife tells him that Angela was returned last night. So he kind of starts to put these pieces together, and he's like, wait a minute. Angela was returned. Vicario brothers want to kill Santiago. Maybe these things have something to do with each other. He's like, all right, so I better go talk to these guys. So he does. He goes, he talks to them, and he thinks that he has solved all the problems of the world because he takes their knives. Obviously, taking the people who slaughter pigs for a living, taking their two knives has solved the problem. He believes that he has solved the problem. And he also kind of scolds them, saying, what would the bishop think? What would the bishop think? He's trying to kind of lay a guilt trip on them here. And I'm kind of moving right along. On page 57, right? Clotilde Armenta says a few things, which is interesting. So one, Colonel thinks he solved it. He says now they haven't got anything to kill him with because they took the knives. She's like, oh my goodness, you know what? These poor guys, they have this horrible duty that has fallen on them. What is this horrible duty that she's talking about? You know? Well, if you don't, I'll tell you. It has something to do with this idea of honor, right? So somebody has taken their sister's honor, and they, as men of this household, have to preserve her honor in some way. And by hurting the person who took her honor, it thereby gives back her honor. So Clotilde recognizes that this is a horrible duty that has fallen on them. But this is an interesting line. It says, because she'd sensed it, she was certain the Vicario brothers were not as eager to carry out the sentence as to find someone who would do them a favor of stopping them. Interesting, right? They're telling everybody what they're going to do. They told a police officer what they're going to do. They talked to the mayor about what they were going to do. They want someone to stop them so that they don't have to follow through with this horrible duty that they've been given. They told more than a dozen people. If you look on page 58, it says at the top, the Vicario brothers had told their plans to more than a dozen people. And then Clotilde, she asked all the people she could to warn Santiago when they saw him. So all of these things are happening, right? After 4 o'clock, she saw the lights in Placidia Linario's house come on. So she sent an urgent message with the beggar woman to Victoria Guzman, which we know Victoria got, but kept to herself, right? Everyone's doing everything possible to stop this murder. This murder still happens. Really, really sad. Then Clotilde is sitting there. The boys have gone away. And here they come. They show back up. Surprise, surprise, they have two more knives. Well, of course they have two more knives. Guys, these guys are pig slaughterers for a living. They have more than 2 knives, so taking away 2 knives didn't stop them. They went back and got more. And so we know that it's probably not all over with. Faustino Santos on page 59, we have Faustino Santos. He is like wondering what's going on. He's like, the boys came by earlier this morning to sharpen some knives, and then they came back and sharpened them again. So we know that the boys are actually putting some effort into this whole ordeal because they're sharpening the knives to make sure that they have what has to be done. Clotilde said this time when they show back up again, she noticed from the moment they saw them that they did not have the same determination as before. Actually, they had had their first disagreement. Okay, so let's talk about this. These boys, these twins, are very different, okay? We have Pablo and Pedro. You should have made a chart at the bottom of this page. That was one of your annotations that you're supposed to do. So Pablo, he's 6 minutes older. He's imaginative. He's more resolute than his brother. Pedro is sentimental but authoritative. He did go into the military. Interesting, right? He went into the military, so I think of him as more, he's definitely more authoritative, probably a little bit more brutal. He is the one who made the first decision to kill Santiago. So when all of this went down and they found out what happened to their sister, he's the one who said, we have to kill him. But when the colonel took their knives away, Pedro was like, done, like, peace out, we tried, they stopped us, so now we've been released from our duty. Pablo decides, oh no, that's not true. We are not done. We are going back. So he drags his brother back to the house. He goes in to get 2 more knives while his brother waits outside. Now, his brother has these problems from the war. Somehow he's got something called blenneria. He's got some problem peeing. So he's outside doing that and feeling sorry for himself while Pablo goes in and gets 2 knives. And when Pablo comes out with the second set of knives, he has to drag his brother along. And they show back up at her place, the milk lady's place. And that's where they show up there. It says this on page 61. This is an interesting line. It says, so he put the knife in his hand and dragged him off almost by force in search of their sister's lost honor. So this tells us precisely why they are doing this, right? They are doing this to get their sister's honor back. They want to get their sister's honor back, but Santiago is their friend. So I think that Pedro was looking for a way to get out of it. He thought they had it, but Pablo was like, oh, heck no, we're going on and doing this. We have these dogs show up again, which is interesting. So the dogs are always barking. You can kind of look at that. Dogs, loyalty, protection, community, resourcefulness. They have a lot of symbols. Something to think about as you see it. As they're walking back to Clotilde's place, he's kind of dragging his brother along. Hortensia Bout, she opens her door as they're passing the house, and she sees them, and she starts to cry because she sees the knives, and the knives look like they're covered in blood, and she thinks that they have already done it. Whoa, they haven't done it yet. Why does she think the knives are covered in blood? Well, this is one of those magical realism moments, so hopefully you notice that. And one of the houses that they stop at, where they stop every morning, these boys stop every morning at Prudencia Cote's house. This is Pablo's fiance. Pablo has a fiance because remember, he didn't go into the military. He stayed behind. So he's been in town. He's got this fiance, Prudencia Cotes. They stop there to have some coffee. The coffee's not made. They're like, oh, listen, we have a lot to do. We're going to have to get out of here. And the mother of the fiance is like, honor doesn't wait. So clearly, the mother of the fiance totally approves of what they're about to do. They end up staying for coffee anyways. The fiance wakes up, she comes down, and she gives the report later on, not only did I agree, I never would have married him if he had not done what a man should do. So many people in the town understand what's going on here. This idea of honor overplays everything. It's even more important than murder, right? So she agrees with this whole thing. And when they leave, she says, take good care of yourselves. And whenever they have to go away to prison, she waits for him because she totally agreed with what he did. They get back to Clotilde's place. They're sitting there. She realizes that they don't look like they're as resolute as they were before. They look like they're even waning even further than they were the first time. For some reason they decide that they have to shave. I guess this is to show us a little bit of the machismo that's going on, because even though we've got Pedro kind of not wanting to do this, we have to see how tough he is, and he shaves himself with a knife, right? He can shave himself with a knife, which he learned when he was in the army. So he uses his straight razor now. We have a whole bunch of this is kind of a funny line at the bottom of 63. 8 customers buying milk they didn't need and asking for items that didn't exist went in and out for the purpose of what? Why are all these people stopping by the milk place? They want to see if the Vicarios are really going to do this, right? Everybody knows. Nobody's saying anything. Really kind of crazy. So the Vicarios last night were out with Santiago. They were out with Santiago and our narrator, and they spent the evening doing lots of things, but they finally wound up at Maria Angelaria Cervantes' house. She is a prostitute. She is the person who everybody lost their virginity to. She's actually highly recognized in this town, right? He wouldn't let them stay that night, and so instead of staying, they got the musicians together. They went to the widower Zeus's house where Bayardo and Angela were supposed to be, and they have the musicians there, and they're singing love songs underneath their windows. Backstory: Santiago fell in love with Maria Cervantes, and he was like head over heels. His dad whacks him in the head. It's like, absolutely not. You are not going to be in love with this. Like, you're not going to let this rule your life. Like, locks him up for a little while. And when he comes out, Maria Cervantes and Santiago have this relationship with one another that doesn't include love. It says without the disorder of love. They are linked by a serious affection without the disorder of love. So that's something to kind of think about there. But she wouldn't let them stay there that night, and your reading does end with them going to Widower Zeus's house at serenade.